along with a number of his other family members. And right here, we do see Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff welcoming Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. And so it does appear as though perhaps they're having a conversation. So I did want to raise the audio for our viewers to see what we can hear.
Great.
The audio just a little bit difficult to hear, but from what we saw with the exchange, you know, Jim, what do you make of this? Obviously, it was an incredibly contentious election cycle, and neither individual really mincing words, or anyone for that matter. When we take a look at this exchange, again, history in the making, you know, what do you glean from that?
It's interesting to me. We've had very few senators become presidents. John Kennedy was one of them. Barack Obama was one, and Warren Harding was one. Very few people come out of the Senate and become president. A lot of them come from the House. A lot of them are governors like Reagan and Carter. But these two people, J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris, both come out of the Senate tradition, which is a very collegial, fight but then get along type of atmosphere, and you could kind of see it in the way they greeted each other. There was grace there on both sides, and I think that that's an important message for the American people, that we can disagree vehemently about policies and about all sorts of things that are really important to us, but at the end of the day, you know, just like those senators have to get along in their legislating for the American people, those two showed that they have Senate blood in them, so to speak, that they both are willing to be collegial and to speak to each other as human beings and as fellow politicians. So I was pleased to see that. I was pleased to see the smiles, and I think it's an important message for the American people.
And I also wanted to share, Jim.
Andrew Kraft here. So talking about their Senate careers, they weren't in the Senate for very long, Harris nor Vance at all. So they didn't necessarily get to, you know, show maybe their legislative bona fides. They were really instantly catapulted to the White House, so to speak, weren't they?
Yes, it's a good point, Andrew. I'm not sure they overlap with each other. I don't think they did. I think she was vice president.
They didn't, no.
Yeah, when he was elected. I'm from Ohio, so I know J.D. Vance. I don't know him personally, but I know about him. And, you know, I know that when he was in the Senate, he didn't have enough time to really establish himself, as you've said. She kind of established herself when she was doing essentially cross-examination of Supreme Court justice candidates, and also on a banking committee. So she was known for being kind of she's a former prosecutor, and she was known for that, you know, in her time in the Senate. She had a little more time there than he did. But if you look at J.D. Vance, it's an interesting thing. Ohio, along with Virginia, claims the most presidents. And the Virginia presidents all came early on: George Washington, Monroe, Madison, Jefferson, and so forth. And then we had the Civil War. And from the Civil War until Warren Harding in 1920, Ohio ruled the presidency. It was Grant, Hayes, Garfield, McKinley, Taft, just a slew of Ohioans. And Ohio became known as the mother of presidents, because many of those people were born in Ohio, but not necessarily, like Grant ran from Illinois. But Ohio was known as a swing state. It was known as a heart of the country type state where, you know, people from both sides would share power back and forth. It's become very red at this point. It's become very ruby red at this point. The Ohio legislature is supermajority Republican. And we now have 2 Republican senators because Sherrod Brown just lost his re-election campaign. So he came out of that milieu, which is a little bit different from the former Ohio presidents who came out of a milieu where there was more of a give and take in Ohio and a division, pretty equal division in the state. It's why it was a bellwether state for over 100 years. But all of those Ohio presidents were Republicans. They were in the tradition of Lincoln. They were in the tradition of, reconstructing the South and so forth. A lot of interesting stories about them. And so J.D. Vance falls into that. I think we've had one vice president who is from Ohio, but it'll be interesting to see what he gets to do, how he's included in the the decisions that are made in the next 4 years. Jimmy Carter started the tradition with Mondale of bringing him into the Oval Office and giving him an office in the White House and consulting with him regularly. And that's been more or less true, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Donald Trump is such a dominant leader, and J.D. Vance has so little experience, relatively speaking. It'll be interesting to see how much he's included and what task he's given, by the president, or if he'll be less of an authority than in the past. So very interesting questions to come.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, Jim, because, talking about the role of the vice president during former President Jimmy Carter's funeral, we were hearing the words of the late former Vice President Mondale, and talking about the reason why he accepted was because he wanted the role of the vice president to be one that was respected, one that was more equal than in years past. And it is going to be interesting to see what that dynamic is like and what role J.D. Vance will play as we continue to take a look outside of Blair House. We are expecting President-elect Trump to depart momentarily. And on the lower right-hand side of your screen, that is an aerial view from inside the Capitol Rotunda, just a stunning view as we take a look. And previously, there were some singers. It does look like perhaps the ceremony, that portion of it has concluded as we do see people exit right there, but just sharing with our viewers the different vantage points as we continue to watch in real time the events unfold. But it is absolutely interesting to see the very beginning, almost, Jim and Andrew, of what is to come in the next 4 years, setting the stage for what is likely to be a very different presidency. And you were mentioning the dynamic and the role, couching that in historical context with previous dynamics and relationships between former presidents and their vice presidents. Andrew, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what unfolds.
Yeah, that's so true. I just have to note, we do see Marine One there in front of the Capitol. That's always a very, very cool shot there. Maybe we could take that full. You see the presidential helicopter there in front of the U.S. Capitol. And so we'll see who gets on that. I believe it will take the Bidens away, and then it will also take the Trumps to the White House. But my producers can correct me if I'm wrong on that front. Can we take the shot of Blair House? While we have Jim, can we just talk about the significance of Blair House? From my understanding, it's kind of like the country's guest room, so to speak. What do we know about it?
Yeah, what we know is that during the Second World War, when Winston Churchill came to the United States and stayed for weeks on end in the White House with Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt was not very happy about that. And eventually she said to him, why don't we have Blair House, which had been there, become kind of our guest house for dignitaries who come rather than having them stay in the White House. There are these hilarious stories of Winston Churchill walking around the White House in the middle of the night. And there's one very famous story of him standing up naked in a bathtub that he was in, saying the Prime Minister of England has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. It was just, it was a real annoyance to Eleanor Roosevelt. So Blair House became kind of this very famous place for distinguished guests to stay. But during Truman's time, the White House was literally falling apart. And so they went in, you ought to see some of the pictures of this. They gutted the White House during Truman's administration, and he lived across the street in Blair House during that time. So it became kind of the White House itself. Then they recreated the White House to what it is now. But it was literally, they were worried that it was going to collapse because it had been so weakened over time. And during that time when Truman was in the Blair House, there was a Puerto Rican nationalist uprising at the time. And there were several of the Puerto Rican nationalists who got guns, came to Blair House to try to assassinate Truman. They got as far as the guards in front of Blair House. Truman was actually taking a nap inside. Several of the guards were killed. The nationalists were killed. It was a really traumatic incident at that time. But the Blair House goes way back. I mean, the people who stayed there and came over to see Lincoln when he was in the White House is interesting. But it really became what you talked about, Andrew, kind of let's have our visitors stay in the Blair House as opposed to having them stay in the White House.
And as we talk about the Blair House, we are still waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to depart. But this is a live look there at the Capitol where we were seeing his daughter, Ivanka Trump, arrive along with a number of other family members right there. This is a live look as they already are starting to trickle in inside the Capitol. You see Eric Trump right there as well, walking inside, of course, awaiting for President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance to arrive. But another historical moment in the making, Jim and Andrew, as this is really just the second time that the swearing-in ceremony is taking place inside at the Capitol Rotunda because of the weather, the incredibly cold weather. But what's also interesting to note is that there have been very cold swearing-in ceremonies that have taken place outdoor. And Jim, historically, when we're taking a look at the decision-making process when it comes to whether or not to hold an inauguration, traditionally outside or now shifting inside, what is the thought process historically when it comes to determining, the events and where they take place?
Good question. Very good question. It gives us a chance to talk about this building too a little bit. When the Capitol was built, the very first building was the Senate building, which is just to the right of the big dome right there. That was the original structure that was built. And then they began to build the middle part that will be the rotunda. The original rotunda had a cap to it that was much, much smaller than the one you see. In fact, the one you see was built during the time of Abraham Lincoln. You can see pictures of it being constructed during one of his inaugurals. So they built that, and then the house was built on the other side. And then eventually they expanded the two wings. So where the Senate is now is further out, where the House is now is further out. But so in that context, these inaugurations took place in various stages and in various places. The Senate building was originally used, as was the House chamber, for the very first presidents. The first time it went outside was Andrew Jackson, and they used the east portico, not the west. The West portico is where it's been done since Ronald Reagan switched it from the east to the west, where you look down the mall and that beautiful setting that you've shown pictures of. It always prior to that was on the east side, and the east side is where you see those famous pictures of Lincoln when he's giving his second inaugural are on the east side. What's interesting is once they built this huge dome on top of the structure, it really made the pillars that were in front of the east look very small and out of place. So there was a project to redo that, and they took those pillars down. They took that facade down. And if you're in Washington and want to have some fun, those pillars are all in the National, Arboretum. standing like, if you went to Rome and saw ruins and so forth. Those pillars are out there, and they were replaced by new pillars and a new facade. So the facade you see with Lincoln is not the same facade where he spoke. It became much bigger and elaborate. And each president, made a decision about whether to go forward with, the exterior inauguration. When Grant was inaugurated, I think it was for his second time, it was extremely cold. It was like, 16 degrees. And he went out, nevertheless, gave his inauguration outside, but he held his inaugural ball in a room in the Treasury building where it was so cold, people were wearing overcoats and the champagne froze. So kind of a famous time there. But, being the Civil War general that he was not going to take it back inside. He held it outside. And then, of course, with Reagan, it was important because by the time you get, to Trump and to Reagan and so forth, you have so many people who show up and who are in danger of having frostbite, or really some bad things can happen in situations in that sort of weather. So I think it was a wise choice to move it inside, just like as it was with President Reagan. But over time, it has been, JFK, it was about the same temperature that it is right now, 22 degrees. He went ahead with it outside. And I think the better idea is to hold it inside, and then, to not have people get injured or hurt during an inauguration.
Yeah, we're just looking at some of the arrivals yet again. Maybe we can listen to some of them here.
As we take a live look at the arrivals here inside the Capitol Rotunda, I want to ask you this, and maybe you know and maybe you don't, but we are awaiting President-elect Donald Trump to depart the Blair House and make his way here. What's the process during this waiting period? What is he doing? Is he practicing his speech? Is he just relaxing? I mean, what does he do during this downtime? Or is he busy making phone calls, as we do know that, he's set to sign, 200 or so executive orders? Can you take us perhaps inside the Blair House as we do await his arrival here?
Well, I doubt he's practiced. I bet he's read over his speech many times, and he's pretty good at reading speeches. And I think he will, he has good delivery. He knows how to give a speech. My guess is he's talking to a lot of different people and getting ready to come over. It's interesting in our history how this, presidents getting to the Capitol to be sworn in. The first inauguration was in New York at a place called Federal Hall, where Washington came all the way from Mount Vernon and rode horseback and through carriages through various cities on the way, and had all this big celebration of him coming to, to that ceremony. He gets to the ceremony. They go to give him the inauguration, and nobody had remembered to bring a Bible. They had to run and get one from a Masonic temple that he used, and that many presidents have used since because of its historic significance. He then walked over to church himself. And then when you had Thomas Jefferson, he left his hotel where he was in Washington and walked to his inaugural, the first one, and then walked back to the hotel following that inaugural. So that was kind of a important point. Later in his second inaugural, he rode a horse to Congress to be sworn in. That then followed with various presidents getting there by various means. I think the first to go in a car might have been McKinley. No, not McKinley, would have been Harding. Subsequently, this tradition developed where once the president was done with the inauguration, then you would have a parade that followed on. And those parades became more and more elaborate. Eisenhower's lasted for 4.5 hours. It was the longest. Wilson's had 40,000 people marching in it. It was the most people marching in a parade. So that became kind of the tradition of the president going back. And as you know, Carter, when he left his inauguration, was being driven back to the White House when he stopped the car, got out, and started to walk. And that became extremely famous. And I think everybody has followed that, where they walk a portion of the time on the way back to the White House. Trump did it and Biden did it. It is become kind of a tradition. It'll be interesting to see in the cold weather whether they'll follow that pattern or not. I wouldn't, frankly, for security and other reasons. But this getting to there and then leaving ended up resulting in the parade that we have, because the early presidents were followed by their enthusiastic supporters back to the White House. Andrew Jackson had such enthusiastic supporters that they came back to the White House and ransacked it. I mean, they went in, punch bowls were thrown everywhere, curtains were torn down, people had to escape through windows. It was just a scene, a joyous scene. But eventually, the way they got everyone out of the White House was to take these big punch bowls outside and get the people to leave the White House.
And Jim, I just wanted to pause as President-elect Donald Trump has now arrived at the White House. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcoming Trump and Melania Trump right there. I am going to raise the audio again. We might not be able to hear much, but let's listen in. And I have to say, this is really interesting as we're watching President Biden and President-elect Trump standing there, apparently seeming to have a conversation of some sorts. And it's just so interesting to see the interactions, as always, as it was a very contentious, battle almost between the two before President Biden announcing that he would step down and step away from running once again for president. But, Jim, when you take a look at that moment, we did this with J.D. Vance, of course, and Vice President Harris. But what do you make of that as they paused right where that photo opportunity was, but to apparently have some sort of conversation?
The same thing I said about the J.D. Vance moment. This is good for the country to see. The unity is good. The friendship shown between two men is good. Melania Trump looked a little uncomfortable, but that's a difficult role to be in. And when the two of them went in, it looked like they continued to talk. This is reminiscent of Obama and Trump speaking at Carter's funeral too. This is a time for people to begin treating each other as not just political enemies, but as, fellow Americans. If you look over time, that interaction can sometimes be very frosty. If you look at when FDR came in 1933 and Hoover lost, they rode together in an open car with the same blanket over them to the Capitol for the inauguration, and FDR chatted away and Hoover said nothing. He was not happy. Carter and Reagan were similar. I don't think Carter was particularly chatty. I think Reagan, being who Reagan was particularly chatty. When Warren Harding won after the First World War, Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. 19 months earlier, he had tried to pass what was called the Versailles Treaty, the League of Nations. It failed. And he, trying to get it passed, Wilson went out into the country to stump for it, had this severe stroke in Denver, was taken back to the White House, had another very severe stroke. And so he was very disabled at that point. And by the time, it came time for Harding to come to the White House and to go with him, they did go over together. But once they got to the Capitol, Harding kind of excused Wilson and said, I will not blame you if you don't want to come out for the ceremony itself, because he really was disabled at that point. And so Wilson was taken to his house on S Street, which is still in existence, a great museum if you're in Washington to go see. But this transition of power, this thing that Reagan talked about in 1981 as being a miracle, it really is a miracle. And it really is interesting. If you look back at Thomas Jefferson, as I told you, there was a really severe fight between Adams and Jefferson. They would later in life become friends and would write letters to each other. They both die on the same day in 1826 on July the 4th, interestingly enough. But during that time, as I said, Adams left and Jefferson went ahead and gave his magnanimous speech. So if you look at what has happened in these transitions of power, many people called that 1801 election a revolution, because it really was the first time we saw political power handed from one party to another. It was the very beginning of parties. And so people saw that as kind of an important revolution and an important development in the American experiment in democracy. And so it has been carried out ever since. And so this scene is a good scene for Americans. And let's hope that the inaugural also continues that feeling of let's unify as a country and move forward as a country. There are a lot of things that need to be addressed in this world and in this country. And, people need to work together to have that all happen.
Jim, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox. Time right now is 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we are continuing our coverage of Inauguration Day, a tea ceremony prior to the swearing-in ceremony. They are inside the White House, media not allowed inside. And of course, one has to wonder what that conversation is going to be like. This is another vantage point there outside the White House. A very snowy ground, a very cold day, which is why in just the first time since 1985, the swearing-in ceremony will be held inside the Capitol Rotunda. And look right here inside Capital One Arena, as of course it is a very chilly day. So unfortunately, the hundreds of thousands at Capitol to watch as history unfolds as Donald J. Trump is sworn in as the 47th president. Unfortunately, packing inside Capitol One Arena to watch the president make his way inside the arena to deliver additional remarks to those as well. And once again, I do want to bring in my colleague Andrew Kraft as we continue our live coverage here. And you can see that lawmakers, Andrew, are arriving there inside Capitol Hill as, arrivals do continue. As we continue to discuss all of this, what are your thoughts as we continue to watch this unfold? Truly historic in nature right there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You're seeing the former speakers of the House there, McCarthy, Boehner, and Gingrich. So that's always interesting to see them kind of commingling together. Of course, Republican political powerhouses, all three of them really in their own right there. But I just want to go back. Our viewers were just watching that really incredible, somewhat tense scene, I think, between the Bidens and the Trumps. And you just kind of have to get into the head of Trump, into the head of Biden. These are longtime political foes. We know that they cannot stand each other. On the surface, yes, they exchanged pleasantries. They had a short conversation. They took the photo here. But the 2020 election and the 2024 election were very hard-fought, contests. We know Trump did not even attend the inauguration of Joe Biden. Of course, things look a lot different this time around. And right now, as we speak, they are having tea together in the White House. And that goes to what Jim Robineau was saying, that this is what this day is about, the peaceful transition of power. You set all that aside, no matter how hard it is in your marrow and in your bones, because electoral defeats are very painful, but you put all that aside for today, one day only. And I think that's what Jim was alluding to. That's what this country is all about. That's what makes us unique. He called it, and many have called it, a miracle, so to speak. So I just wanted to note that there. Of course, we know President-elect Trump's relationship with former House Speaker McCarthy. You'll remember, Stephanie, in the wake of the January 6th Capitol attack, mere days, if not weeks afterward, Kevin McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago. And that was really Trump's image in the wake of the January 6th Capitol attack, that there were going to be fellow Republicans who will still stand by him and forgive him for January 6th. So I thought that was interesting. McCarthy, of course, we know how that unfolded for him. He lost the gavel. His own fellow Republicans, 8 of them, ousting him from the speakership now a little bit over a year ago. And so he's on hand. There's going to be a lot of people on hand in the Capitol Rotunda. But that's what I'm thinking of right now. And just for our viewers, to give them up to speed on what's happening live right now, they are, the Bidens and the Trumps, having tea together at the White House before they ride together to the Capitol, to the Rotunda for the swearing in.
You know, and we're taking a live look, Andrew, of the White House right there as the tea ceremony is underway. And you know, it's always so interesting as we see, you know, the political rivalry, you know, front and center, you know, especially during the election cycle. And, you know, the ability for some, perhaps not all, but some of these politicians to then set that rivalry, that contentiousness aside, you know, and seeing beyond perhaps the political party and seeing the person instead. You know, as we take a look at the political landscape, you know, what do you make of that? Because we were seeing President-elect Trump and former President Barack Obama speaking with one another quite cordially at the funeral service of former President Jimmy Carter. Of course, you know, not everyone is able to, you know, put those politics aside after leaving office, after handing the baton, so to speak, you know, but one has to wonder what the conversation is like now inside the White House, as in just hours, President Biden no longer president, and President-elect Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, and for the second time.
Right. I mean, history is contingent. Elections matter. I'm sure you have. I know I have lost contests in my personal life, minor, large, grand, small, and it's tough and it hurts. But that's what this day is about. You put those aside. You let bygones be bygones for at least a couple hours.
Absolutely. And that apparently is what they are going to do. And, you know, just to give our viewers just another look right here, I did want to share this live look right here as well, as we are taking a look outside the Capitol Hill right there, outside the Capitol building. You can see buses lining up, most likely to bring in individuals into the Capitol Rotunda. And there is the aerial view. Unfortunately, it does go in and out, as, you know, we do get these live streams from time to time, but I did want to share that with you as we continue.
I think that would be helpful for some people watching, because to your point, Stephanie, it is going to be a who's who of the federal government. It's going to be a who's who of Washington, but world leaders are also in attendance. I believe I saw the Argentinian president, Javier Milei, and other former world leaders as well. So we'll do our best pointing out these individuals, pointing out these members of Congress, former members of Congress, incoming and outgoing members of both administrations here. That's always, to your point, interesting to see who's there and who's not, who's seated next to who and who's standing maybe. But we're finally getting a live picture inside of the Rotunda. We were wondering how this was all going to look because they had to pull it together so quickly. And there you see more of these individuals walking into Congress there. And if I recognize anyone, I will definitely point them out here. Looks like Tulsi Gabbard there, Vivek Ramaswamy, other members of the incoming Trump cabinet, and some of the staffers who will work in the second Trump White House. Upon confirmation, of course, there's Elon Musk.
And Andrew,
we can see if we can hear some of the natural sound. That's always interesting too.
It is, and we can see the inside of the rotunda as this, they continue to, weave through shots right here. But, as we take a moment to pause, I do want to bring in Rebecca Castor with Fox News as well as we continue our live coverage right here. And Rebecca, we're taking a live look from inside the Capitol Rotunda as we see lawmakers, officials, and really the who's who of Washington and the business industry, arrive ahead of this swearing-in ceremony. We see the Capitol building right there behind you as we are awaiting the arrival of President-elect Donald Trump. Security, of course, top of mind. Thousands of law enforcement officers spreading out across Washington, D.C. to make sure that what happens is as seamless as possible, a hustle and bustle, if you will, ahead of the swearing-in ceremony. So, can you set the scene for us right now?
Hey, Stephanie, good morning. So speaking with other reporters on our Fox team who have covered inaugurations here in D.C. in the past, they're saying that this security feels a lot more ramped up than previous inaugurations. So even though things have moved indoors, security is still red hot. They have the Capitol building pretty much locked down like a fortress. There are miles and miles of fencing all around the Capitol building, as well as some of the nearby streets. It's really hard to travel by car here in downtown D.C. right now. People are saying that they've been having to walk for several miles to get to some of these locations. But yesterday, thousands of police officers from across the country arrived here in D.C. They were sworn in by the local police chief, and they have been given police powers to help out the D.C. Metro Police as well as the Capitol Police as well. They're expecting at least 19 different protests to possibly happen around the district today, so we're going to be monitoring that. We know that they're going to have drones out, also monitoring events from the sky. So if anybody is here watching locally and they see drones in the air, that is likely what they are doing, monitoring some of these events. A lot of things are going to look different today than they have in the past now that this inauguration is moving inside the Capitol. It's been 40 years since a president was sworn in inside the Capitol Rotunda. Those lawmakers that are entering now to the Capitol Rotunda, that's an exclusive invitation. We're told only about 600 people are going to be able to sit inside the Capitol to be able to watch the swearing in happen in person. There's going to be an overflow room as well. So I think there was some discussion on Capitol Hill, lawmakers lobbying to try to get the best seat in the House and to actually be there in person as opposed to that overflow room. But it's just not going to be the same event as if we would have seen Donald Trump outside on the west front of the Capitol taking the oath of office. Of course, all of these changes, primary reason is the weather. This morning, the feels like temperature was about 12 degrees. The sun is up, so it's warmed up a bit now. It feels a little bit more comfortable outside, but that decision was made with the safety in mind of the hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country who traveled to D.C. and we're going to congregate on the National Mall. They've actually shut that down. People that are still here are not able to even be around the National Mall today. They've locked it down because the police just don't want people gathering because of just the safety conditions out here in the weather.
All right, Rebecca, we do appreciate you sharing that with us as we continue to follow the very latest. And we did want to once again share this live look outside the Capitol Rotunda. We saw Jeff Bezos, of course, founder, CEO of Amazon, along with his fiancee, Lauren Sanchez. And I did want to raise the audio to see what we can hear as the arrivals continue at the U.S. Capitol ahead of the swearing-in ceremony. And we see former President Bill Clinton along with Hillary Rodham Clinton also in attendance right there, just posing for pictures. And we do know that, all of the living presidents will be in attendance, as well as the former first ladies, everyone except for Michelle Obama, who will not be attending, not giving any particular reason why that is. She also did not attend former President Jimmy Carter's funeral as well. As we continue truly to see the who's who, we do hear some of the music right here, so we pause on the commentary and allow you to listen in. And there we have Rudy Giuliani, the former attorney for President-elect Donald Trump, of course, the former mayor there of New York City, as Rudy Giuliani now making his way inside ahead of the swearing-in ceremony for President-elect Donald Trump. We continue to see this, but I do want to pivot now because we do see here the departure there at the White House, as we do see Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff and soon to be First Lady Vice President there. And we are waiting in. I'm going to raise the audio as we are expecting President Biden and President-elect Donald J. Trump to be departing as well momentarily.
Yeah, and Stephanie, we're just watching, you just saw the second gentleman there, Doug Emhoff, with the incoming second lady, Vance, there, leave the White House. We know tea is happening between the Bidens and Trumps as we speak, but we were seeing a slew of dignitaries there enter into the Capitol Rotunda, including many, many members of the House and the Senate. You also, I'm not sure if some of our viewers caught, you saw Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, there walking into the rotunda. And from what I understand, I believe he will be administering the oath of office. Trump has two Bibles that will be used to administer the oath, his mother's Bible, and then, of course, the very, very famous Lincoln Bible from 1861. That's been a hallmark. It's been a tradition for many, many inaugurations past. So just a really, really beautiful live look. Let's keep listening.
Ready, host. Ready, host.
And Stephanie, in these moments, in these parts, I have to be honest with the viewer, it is my favorite just to see who's talking to who and who's not talking to who and who's greeting each other and who's turned their body language away from each other. It is fascinating. And almost the former speakers there right in the front kind of unofficially acting as a greeting line for so many members there of the House. Many Republican members right there. You see Chip Roy, you see Brian Stile from Wisconsin, and others there. You see Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey. Of course, Chip Roy drawing the ire of President-elect Trump during the entire government funding shutdown showdown that was averted mere weeks ago after the Christmas holiday. But it's just very, very interesting. So we are seeing this, Stephanie, of how all these people are going to fit in the Capitol Rotunda, and it is getting full, and it is getting packed, as we can see. So we're going to do our best to point out some of these notable individuals, some of these dignitaries there gathered, invited. Now, what was so interesting, a lot of these lawmakers, they get their own kind of set of tickets where they can hand out and dole out at will to, you know, supporters and family and friends. Well, that was kind of moot this year because it was moved inside from outside because it was so cold. So to your point, we have heard from a lot of people, people who come from all over the country to be here for Inauguration Day. Pretty disappointing. And to your point, the National Mall right now, not a soul in sight. And that is never the case on these inauguration days. It is teeming with thousands of people. And you see there some of the members of Congress, Mike McCall there from Texas, Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, Greg Meeks from New York, Byron Donalds from Florida there, Mike Waltz, the incoming National Security Advisor. Of course, remember, he had to resign his House seat in order to take this role. This is not a Senate-confirmed role, National Security Advisor. And you see so many others from the Texas Republican congressional delegation there.
And also, you know, Andrew, what's interesting is, of course, obviously all of this has had to pivot from an outdoors event to an indoors one, and the reason being that it was too bitterly cold outside. And now one has to wonder, with hundreds and hundreds of people packing inside the Capitol Rotunda, how warm it's going to get inside there. They might have a very different issue when you have so many people packed shoulder to shoulder. It does get very warm, and, you know, it is going to be interesting to see, as you mentioned, the interaction between the people as we continue to see that interaction. I did want to just allow our viewers to just absorb and you know, be part of this as we continue to raise the audio and just listen in and, you know, just take stock of this historic event. Although we do want to now pivot as we continue to see, here's a live look right here of the First Lady Jill Biden and the soon-to-be First Lady Melania Trump now leaving the White House, entering into the motorcade as they make their way to the Capitol Rotunda right there. A live look, as you can see, another event happening as the First Lady Jill Biden and soon-to-be First Lady Melania Trump departing together in this vehicle right here on their way to the Capitol Rotunda. We have yet to see President-elect Trump and President Biden. They will be likely the very last individuals to depart the White House on their way. As we were mentioning, Andrew, President Biden, President-elect Trump taking part in the traditional tea ceremony where they sit down for tea and, you know, have a conversation of sorts ahead of the inauguration and the official oath of office.
Yeah, I think the role of the First Lady, especially with Melania Trump, will be very interesting the second time around. Of course, you have to imagine what Jill Biden and Melania Trump discuss. Melania Trump is not a new First Lady. She is incoming and a former First Lady herself. And it was reported that Melania Trump's people did decline another invitation for tea with First Lady Biden a couple of weeks back. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe no love lost between the two there. But we know Melania Trump really took a back seat, was almost completely absent from the 2024 campaign. Yes, she did appear at that Madison Square Garden rally in New York City. She did appear at the RNC there in Milwaukee. She did not speak at the RNC. And so it'll be interesting to see. She did take somewhat of a back seat in the Trump first term as well. In the role of First Lady, the role of First Lady that Jill Biden took was very front and center, was very prominent. Some would even argue that she was, because of President Biden's age or alleged infirmities or alleged senility, that she was somewhat also in charge of the inner circle, so to speak. So I thought those roles were very different.
And we
now
see the
have
doors,
the two
Andrew,
principals, I believe, coming out. Maybe not?
I just wanted to let our viewers know we see the doors opening once again. That, of course, is Vice President-elect J.D. Vance alongside Vice President Harris. They, too, will be sharing a motorcade. And to your point, Andrew, you were mentioning it's going to be interesting to see what First Lady Jill Biden and Melania Trump will be speaking about. Now you have Vice President Harris and J.D. Vance sharing a vehicle. You know, is there going to be any sort of conversation, you know, as they make their way to the Capitol Rotunda? We continue to talk about the political dynamics. And, you know, it's always interesting. We see them from a distance, but truly they only know what's happening inside that vehicle, of course, alongside, you know, Secret Service. But They too are departing the White House. And finally, as we pivot the view right there back to the front doors, you know, we are expecting to see President-elect Trump and President Biden to depart shortly. I also wanted to share this look as we continue to take a look. You can see House Speaker Mike Johnson there arriving at the Capitol Rotunda as we do see the limousine that is set to depart the White House right here. And I did just want to pause on this live look as we are expecting President-elect Trump and President Biden to be departing the White House in just a matter of moments, also sharing a singular vehicle as they make their way to the Capitol Rotunda for this historic moment as President-elect Donald Trump is going to be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States.
And just to note, Stephanie, the woman in the green jacket, that was Senator Deb Fischer from Nebraska. There's this entire congressional committee known as the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. They are tasked with putting all this on. And so that's why you saw Senator Deb Fischer there, the Republican from Nebraska. And so they are responsible for planning this, for making sure it all goes off without a hitch. And so they are instrumental in this. You're going to see them quite a lot today. And you just saw Deb Fischer there with, I believe, Usha Vance and Doug Emhoff. So wanted just to note that there as well. You also see some of these congressional leaders get there into the rotunda. You just saw Hakeem Jeffries and others, Speaker Mike Johnson. So congressional leadership looks like they are in the building now. We are awaiting, to your point, President-elect Trump and President Biden. And to your point, I do hope that maybe some of the official photographers will release photos from inside the limousines of how these moments transpired, what the conversations were like. Maybe we can get some reporting as well. We do know, though, the Bidens have been somewhat gracious with the Trumps after the November 5th election. President Biden inviting Trump to the White House that very same week and committed to a peaceful transition of power. And that is what we are seeing today. And that is why this is so important. So Biden and Trump will be riding over in the Beast to the Capitol from the White House momentarily. This is really quite something. You know, obviously they haven't spent that much time together. They were on a debate stage twice in 2020. They were on a debate stage once in 2024. They've appeared at similar events at the same time, but I would venture to say that this is going to be the closest in proximity they have been for the longest duration, maybe ever. And so you just have to wonder what those conversations are going to be like. These political rivals, political foes, from all reporting suggests they literally cannot stand each other. And I think a lot of the viewers forget that after Biden sought not to seek re-election after the debate in June in Atlanta, where he withdrew from the ticket, the Trump campaign had a difficult time adapting and adjusting to the fact that he was not going to be the rival. It was going to be someone else, and here they are.
And as the limousine departs right there, we actually saw President-elect Trump on his cell phone, Andrew, just checking some stuff. But we were hearing one of the reporters yelling out to both Biden and Trump, what are you going to talk about? And obviously they did not answer. But of course, that's the question that everyone wants to know. What will these gentlemen be speaking about? They, of course, were joined by Representative Amy Klobuchar, who, is part of the committee that oversees the inauguration and all of the events. But still, curious minds want to know, Andrew, what is the conversation going to be like inside this limo? I don't know specifically, and perhaps you do, just how many minutes it's going to take for the limousine to actually arrive at the Capitol, but it could either be a very long ride or it could be a very short and comfortable ride. We don't know.
Yes, it is a very short ride, under 10 minutes. And yeah, you saw there Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, the Democrat, another member of this joint congressional committee on inaugural ceremonies. And so she's also in the limousine. Maybe she'll be breaking the ice, so to speak, between Trump and Biden. But this leads me to wonder as well, Stephanie, what is the Biden post-presidency going to look like? We know they're going to be, they being Joe and Joe Biden, they'll be spending a couple of days in Santa Barbara, California. After today, they'll be whisked off there to the West Coast. We know Trump is going to the West Coast later this week on Friday to survey some of the damage wrought by the LA wildfires. So they may be in California at the same time as well. But a post-presidency looks different, so to speak, if you're Obama and you're leaving the White House in your 50s. Biden leaving the White House in his early 80s. I wonder how he will choose to use that. He said in a speech in South Carolina just yesterday, he is going to remain engaged. He is going to remain committed. He's not going anywhere. So I think it remains to be seen what his role in American political life will be going forward. Sometimes presidents, all presidents, when they leave the White House, they go back to being everyday regular citizens. But some take up a role and they want to use their influence that they had in the Oval Office, even while not in the Oval Office. Jimmy Carter was a perfect example of that. And so you're watching the beast right now move down Pennsylvania Avenue, down to the U.S. Capitol. This is quite something. This is remarkable. Let's just watch and listen.